static related, static variables, static static keywords, static variables, right? So we have seen one example where we have created one class. In that class, we have declared one variable that is the static variable. Static variables are also called as class variables. And you can access the static variables using directly class name. This gets loaded into memory when at the time of class loading. These are shared among all the classes. You don't need to create the instance of the class to access this static variable, right? That thing we have seen in the last session. So anyone has any doubt in this? I hope everyone understood this example. Today we will see the next point, that is static method. So next, we use the static keyword with the method. Static methods are also used to define some common behavior for all the instances. That means the static methods are also shared among all the instances of a class. This is also the shared resource. All the properties of static keyword which we have seen, all those apply to a static method itself. Okay, the static methods are also known as class method. As a static variable also known as class variables. Similarly, the static methods are also known as class methods. These are also gets loaded into memory first at the time of class loading into a memory known as static context. Okay, so the main thing here is the methods are stored here into the static context at the time of class loading, and those also gets loaded into memory first. And that is why main method is declared as static. You must have seen whenever we are using a main method, it is already declared as static method, because the main thing to declare the main method as a static, whenever we are executing this class, this method gets automatically executed without creating any instance of this class. So how it is possible, how the JVM calling this main method? Because this main method is declared as static, it is shared among all instances of this class, and we don't need to create the instance of this class to call this main method. It can be done using the name of the class itself and the name of the method. Okay, so here this main method gets called by the JVM directly without creating the instance of the class, and it is also loaded into the memory at first at the time of class loading, and that is why main method is declared as static, so that it should get declared as static, it should get loaded into the memory to start the execution of that particular program or application. So whenever we are calling a main method, this JVM will call the main method, and it is without creating any instances of that particular class. Okay, so why the main method is declared as static? It is because it should get loaded into memory first, and we don't need to create any instance of that class to call the main method, so that JVM will start execution immediately when you run the application. Okay, so some properties of the static methods are, it is shared among all the instances, same as the static variables. It also has only one single copy. So method is also written only once. Memory will be allocated only once. For every instance, it will never use multiple memory allocations. It will always use a single copy. Okay, it is loaded when the class gets loaded, and it has only one time memory allocation. So we will see one example. We'll create another class in the same package, modulate. Here we have created static keyword. In that, we'll create another class. Name of the class I am giving as static method example. Public static void main method I am including in the same file. Okay. Now here we will create a method, static method. So static method always have the static keyword. You can specify access specifiers if required, that is public, static. Suppose the method is not going to return anything, so the return type will be void, and the name of the method is display. Suppose I am simply writing down one statement here, calling static display method. Okay, so this is the one way. You cannot write the private. If you are writing the private static void show method, suppose. Okay, so we are writing the private static show method. So here, suppose I am writing system.out.println calling static show method. Okay, so you can create the private method also, private static method also. Public static is by default, you know that. Okay, as the main method is public static. Depending on the access specifiers, you can create any static method with the default accessibility as well as private accessibility, public accessibility, and protected accessibility as well. Okay, so but only thing is, whenever you are creating the private static method, you should call this method somewhere in another method, so that this classes, this private method should get access. Okay, so the both methods we are going to call here into the main method. So how to call the static methods? As we have seen, whenever you are creating any static variables, you need to access those variables using the name of the class, right? But here, whenever you are creating any static methods, you can use the name of the class to call it also. Okay, like static method example dot display. Okay, so this is one way to call static method. Okay, this is the first way to call static method, when you can access the method using the name of the class. Okay, but as you can see, we have written the static methods inside the same class itself. Okay, so these are again class methods. These are also known as class methods. These are also known as class methods. So you don't need to use the name of the same class if they are written in the same class. You don't have to use the name of the class. You can directly call it using the name of your method. Okay, that means show method. Okay, so that this static method is, we are using show method call from the static main method. Okay, remember one thing here, this method, main method, is a static method so that it can access another static context. Okay, so that it can access another static context, all the static context, that means variables and the methods. If any method which is a non-static, so I am writing here one non-static method. Suppose the method non-static is nothing but, we say it as instance methods. Instance method. Okay, suppose the method is void calculate. Okay, or I will use some other name, void sing system.out.println. Okay, non-static method, that is known as instance method. Suppose you want to call this method, then you cannot call this by directly using the name of the class or directly with the name of the method. No, it is not possible, because this is a non-static method. Okay, non-static methods or members, you can say, are not accessible, from static context. Then if you want to call any non-static method or instance method, you have to create object of the class and then you can call it. That means you have to create the object of the class, that is static method example dot sing method. Okay, this is possible, but this is not. Why? Because whenever any static method you are creating, the memory is allocated at the class loading time itself, right? We have the addresses of these methods, so that whenever you are calling these methods from main method, you can say that we have addresses of these methods, where to place a call to this, where to go into the address and call that method. We have everything at the time of class loading itself. But for the non-static context, as these are instance methods, until and unless you create the instance of this class, the memory will not be allocated, right? Because these are instance method. Memory will be allocated only when you create the instance of that class. And they are sharing, they are not shared resource, right? They have their own copy of each and every instance. That's why sing method will not have any memory allocated at this point of time, at this line of code execution. That's why this is non-static methods or non-static members are not accessible from static context. Remember this thing. So if you want to call the non-static method or non-static member you have to access, then you always need to create the instance first, and then it will be accessible and you can call that method or you can access that variable member, etc. Okay, so always remember, non-static and static context is different. You cannot access non-static context from static context. Okay, so if you want to access the non-static context, you always have to use the instance, because these are instance members, instance variables, instance methods. So basically one thing, whenever you are using the static keyword with any member, that can be accessed only within the static itself. Okay, suppose you thought that in the sing method you want to call this show method. Yeah, that is possible. But again, you have to use the name of the class. Okay, so name of the class dot show method, you can call it. Okay, so in the non-static, you can call the static context, but from the static context, you cannot call non-static context. Okay, that is the main difference between the static and non-static. Okay, so this is the second way of calling if those are in same class. If these methods are in same class. Okay, so if the methods are in the same class, you can directly use the name of the method also to call that method. We'll execute this. So you can see first display method is called. This static show method from the main method is called. This show method is called from the sing method, and sing method we are calling using instance. Okay. Calling using instance. Clear? Any doubt, anyone till here? Understood? Go through this example once and let me know if you have any doubt. Clear? Shall we go ahead? Any method, not necessarily public static only. If the static method you want to call in the same method, you can call it, or any instance method also, you can call the instance methods also in the same way without creating any object. If you are defining the another instance method, suppose that method is suppose dance method, and I want to call sing method from this method. Okay, you can call it using the name directly. So basically the methods are defined in the same class. Then you can call those methods with directly by name. And if you want to call the methods from another class, you have to create the instance of the class if those are instance methods. And if those are static methods, you have to use the name of the class to access it. Clear? So accessibility is always depend on which access modifier you are using. If you are using public, then you can access it from any other classes. If you are using private, then this is accessible only within the same class. If you are using default, then within the same package, you can call that method. And if you are using protected, then classes from the same package and child classes from another package you can access. Okay, so these two are basically instance methods, which will have the memory allocated when you create the instance of that class. Unless and until you are not creating instance, these will not have any importance, you can say, or there will be no memory allocation. They are useless till you create the object. Okay, when you create the object, according to the objects, it will have their own copy of these methods. But in contrary, you can say for the static methods, they only have the memory will be allocated only once. They will have only single memory allocation, and they are single copy shared among all the instances, regardless of how many instances you are creating. Clear? Shall we go ahead?
Yeah, the single memory is allocated for all the functions, right?
For
Like
static.
static methods. Okay. So if I'm calling 10 times also, I'm using the same memory block.
Yes.
Okay. But for this void sing and void dance, there is nothing called as a memory allocation. So as per the class name dot sing, so static method example dot sing, that time only uh, the memory is getting allocated.
Yes, when you are creating object or instance, that time only for sing method, you are creating your memory will be allocated for sing and dance both.
Okay.
You can call any method, but whenever you have initialized the object, immediately it will allocate the memory for all the instance members. That is nothing but if you have any instance variable and instance methods, or for all, they will allocate memory. JVM will allocate a memory, and that will be accessed when you are calling a method with the help of object. But here, for the static methods, always single time memory allocation will be done at the time of class loading itself, and the same memory will be shared among all the instances. Okay, we will do one more example so that you will understand this clearly. Now here we will identify when to use this static method, when to define the static method and when to define the instance method also. Okay, that also we will see from one example. Before that, first we will see one more example. Here we will create one class. Suppose that class is circle. We have already created the circle class. Still, I will create one circle class. Okay. This class circle has one radius variable, right? We have created the integer radius variable, and I want to create one pi, which is double pi variable. The value for this will be fixed. So I am creating this variable as static. Okay, I want to assign some value to it. We will use default constructor. In this default constructor, for the current radius variable value, I am setting to 10. And for pi value, I am setting to 3.1. Okay, so I am initializing basically the static variable value 3.14. Okay, you can change the value anytime. Whenever you are defining static variable, you can change it anytime. Okay, and here we have seen this example basically. So instead of this circle, I will use another class. We have seen this part already. So what we will do, we will write down some methods itself and one variable. Suppose that variable is static integer counter. Okay, I am assigning the value to 1. Now I want to find out whether the number is even or odd. Okay, so for that I am creating one method, public void even odd, and one parameter to this method, that is number. Now this even odd method is taking one parameter, that is number, and I want to find out whether that number is even or odd. You know that the logic behind the number is even or odd. Whether if that number is completely divisible by 2, then you can say that that number is even. Okay, so here we will write it down, system.out.println is even. Okay, and in the else block, if it is not completely divisible, then we can say that the number is odd, right? So now if I want to find out any number is even or odd, so there is no need of creating this even odd method as static instance method. Why? अगर मैंने इस मेथड को इंस्टेंस मेथड क्रिएट किया तो ये लॉजिक तो चेंज होने वाला नहीं है, देन इट विल नेवर चेंज द लॉजिक बिहाइंड हाउ टू फाइंड आउट द इवन एंड ऑड, right? So there is no need of creating multiple. If I am creating multiple objects, suppose S1 is the object I am creating here right now, new. Okay, this is the first object I have created. Suppose I am creating one more object. So what will happen for S1 object and S2 object? The even on method will be, the code will be same, but these will have different memory allocations for S1.evenOdd and S2.evenOdd. The logic behind this even odd calculation or finding out whether the number is even or odd, it's same. So there is no need of creating this method as what type of method? Instance method. Instead of that, instead of creating this method as instance method, you can make this method as static method so that the memory will be allocated only once and it will be, the memory will be saved, because for these two objects, there is 2 different copies of the same method will be there without changing anything. So instead of that, you can save the memory by creating this method as static method. ठीक है? So जब आपको कुछ calculations करने हैं, जब आपको कुछ values define करने हैं, code will or the logic will never change. At that point of time, you can define that method as static method. Okay. One more we will see after this. Then I'm creating one more. So this is one part. Okay. So similarly, one more method I will create. Suppose I want to find out the counter value. So this counter is again the static member. Okay. So you can create instance variable or the static method, oh sorry, instance method or the static method as well to access this counter variable, because this is a static member. So you can access it from non-static and static both context. We have just seen that part here, okay, in this example. So here I am creating one more method, that is public void counter. Okay, the method name is counter or get counter, you can use get counter. So this method is going to return the counter value and we are incrementing this value. Okay, so what we will do here, we will display system.out.println counter value is equals to, we will display the counter variable here. Okay, and we will increment it counter plus plus post increment I am using. So whenever you are calling this method, you will get the counter value and the counter value will be incremented by 1. Okay. Now this method is instance method. You can create this get counter method as instance method or static method. Okay. You can define this as instance method or static method. Okay, anything you want, because this counter variable is static. Okay, so you know that static members can be accessed within the static and non-static context. Okay, so जहाँ पे static context and non-static context दोनों में हम static members को access कर सकते हैं. So here you can create this method as instance method or static method, but mostly whenever you are using the static context in any method, we create that method as static itself. Okay, because memory, now the same logic here, there is no need of creating this method as a instance method, क्योंकि हर instance के लिए हर एक का कॉपी अलग अलग रहने का कोई जरूरत नहीं है, as this is a static मेंबर स्टैटिक वेरिएबल है. दैट मीन्स अगर आपने कभी भी इसको चेंज किया तो वो सबके लिए चेंज होगा, सारे इंस्टेंस के लिए वैल्यू चेंज होने वाला है. सो देयर इज नो पॉइंट ऑफ क्रिएटिंग दिस मेथड एज अ इंस्टेंस मेथड. यू कैन क्रिएट दैट मेथड एज अ स्टैटिक मेथड इटसेल्फ. ठीक है, सो जब भी आपको स्टैटिक मेंबर्स को एक्सेस करना है, क्रिएट दैट मेथड एज स्टैटिक. जब भी आपको कोई कैलकुलेशंस करने हैं, कुछ परफॉर्म करना है जिसका लॉजिक कभी चेंज नहीं होगा, क्रिएट दैट मेथड एज स्टैटिक मेथड. ठीक है, सो यहाँ पे जो दो ऑब्जेक्ट्स हमने क्रिएट किए हैं, वी डोंट नीड दोज ऑब्जेक्ट्स because all these are static members. You can access those directly by name of the class. Now all these are defined in the same class, so you can access those directly by name of the method also. Like even odd, I'm passing the 63 value. For even odd, I'm passing 96 value. Okay, so I am calling the even odd method 2 times. Okay, similarly, here you can call the get counter method. Also, the get counter method is going to display the value. You can call the get counter method n number of times. You can call any static method n number of times. There is no point of creating the objects here. अगर आपने objects create किए हैं तो objects का यूज करके आपको स्टैटिक मेंबर्स को कॉल करने की जरूरत नहीं है, because all these will be sharing these methods. Okay, these two methods are shared resources, so those are shared among these objects itself. Okay, so we have not created any instance method here. so there is no need. अगर आपने get counter method लिखा है as a static non-static method, then you need to use this. Suppose first मैं इसको execute करके दिखाती हूँ, फिर हम इसको non-static करके देखते हैं. Okay, 63 is odd, 96 is even, counter value will be 1, counter value will be 2. Okay, now I am changing this method to get counter method to instance method. Okay, now we need to use s1 dot get counter. Okay, s2 dot get counter. I will again call s1 dot get counter, s2 dot get counter. Now these become the instance methods. That's why we are using these two instances to find out whether the values will be different for both or not. So actually the values are not different because this counter is static. If any one of the object is changing the value of the counter variable, it will be affected for all the instances. Okay, it will be changed for all the instances. So for the first s1 dot get counter, the value of this will be 1 and it will be incremented to 2. और s2 के लिए तो 2 होगा, फिर से s1 के लिए भी अगेन 2 का 3 हुआ क्योंकि काउंटर प्लस प्लस हमने किया है. So it is incrementing the value and we are getting 3 as the output. Same counter 4 value for next time. If I am calling the get counter method again, we will get again the incremented value 5 for the next counter. Okay, so basically I want to show you that if you are using the static member and you are using the instance method then the value gets updated and that value updated for all the instances regardless of the copy, because they are sharing single copy of the static member. Okay, clear? Understood? Any doubt in this example? Anyone has any doubt? Okay. Okay, I will explain. So we have created two objects, right? S1 and S2. This is S1. S1 object and this is S2 object. Okay. Now S1 and S2, we have created one two static members. One is the variable and second one is method. Okay. So first we have created static counter. We have initialized that value to 1. Okay. Now the counter value is 1. And we have created one more method, that is even odd, which is taking one number as input. Okay. So we have created two static members and two objects of the class. Now we have created get counter method, which is get counter method is instance method, right? This get counter method is different. Okay, as you know that instance methods have their own copy of for all different instances, right? हर एक इंस्टेंस के लिए उसका हर एक इंस्टेंस मेथड का खुद का कॉपी होता है, right? So the get counter method, memory will be allocated of S1 will be different, memory will be allocated for S2 will be different. Okay, but this get counter method is accessing one static member, that is a counter. Okay, and this counter variable is shared among all these two, right? Or एनी इंस्टेंसेस, कितने भी इंस्टेंसेस हो वो सारे शेयर कर रहा है काउंटर वेरिएबल, right? So what we have written into this get counter method, we have just incremented the value of counter static variable, correct? So s1 object, if we are accessing this get counter method is accessing this counter method, counter variable, this is also accessing the counter variable which is shared. Then if this get counter method, you are using s1 objects get counter method, then this method access the static counter. So the current value of the counter variable is 1, and we have used that, we have incremented that value to next plus plus kiya hai, right? It is a plus plus operation, right? So we are basically using post increment operation. So we are incrementing the value of current value is 1. We are incrementing the value, that is number plus plus or counter plus plus, right? So counter plus plus we are using here. This counter plus plus will always increment the value, correct? Here for the S1 object. And it is again, that value will be again static. So again, it is shared among S1 and S2 object. This get counter method is also doing the same thing. That is, it is also incrementing the value of counter variable. So whenever you are calling the method using S1 object, get counter method, it will increment the value to 2. S2 object is accessing its get counter method, but this instance method is accessing again shared resource, right? So the updated value is shared among all the instances. This shared value is accessed here into this get counter method, and it is again incrementing the counter variable to 3. Okay, in this way, basically, if you are creating the instance methods with the static context or static member, then there is no point of creating these as a instance variable or instance methods, because they are using the shared resource, shared variable. If you are updating that value, it will get updated for all the instances, as this is a shared part. The memory will be allocated for this variable is only once, for this method is only once, because these are static members. All these are static members, right? These are static members. These are static members. So memory will be allocated for these static members only once, when at the time of class loading, regardless of these objects of the classes. ठीक है, इसका कोई यूज नहीं है. बट अगर आप इंस्टेंस मेथड यूज करते हो स्टैटिक मेंबर को एक्सेस करने के लिए, then there is no point of creating that method as instance method. Why? Because whenever you are updating the value of the static member, static variable, it will be updated for all the instances, क्योंकि उसका मेमोरी एक ही जगह पे है, एक ही जगह पे जाके वो अपडेट करेगा. जहां पे ये काउंटर वेरिएबल स्टोर हुआ है उसी मेमोरी लोकेशन पे जाके काउंटर वेरिएबल को इंक्रीमेंट करके वैल्यू सेव होगी. एंड वो मेमोरी अलोकेटेड जो मेमोरी है वो शेयर्ड है आपके मल्टीपल इंस्टेंसेस में. ठीक है, so that's why whenever you are calling any method, whenever you are calling the get counter method using both objects, you will be getting always the incremented value regardless of the its own copy of this get counter method. ठीक है, उसका खुद का कॉपी है, फिर भी आपको इंक्रीमेंटेड वैल्यू सबके लिए सीक्वेंस में ही मिलेगा, बिकॉज दिस मेंबर is a static member and ये shared है among all the instances. Memory is shared among all the instances will be same. Clear?
Okay, suppose if I remove static keyword, so that time if I'm calling the get counter, right? So it will be like a 1 and again a 1, 1, 1 like that.
Yes. So I will show you that. If I am removing this static, this will become your instance member, right? So now S1 and S2 object will have their own copy of counter variable, which will be starting from 1. So this will be for S1 object. This will be for S2 object. The initial value will be 1. Again, from S1 object, we are calling the get counter method. So value will be incremented only for the S1 object. Again, we have called the get counter method using S2 object. So value will be incremented for S2 object only. We will not getting same value for or incremented value for everyone, because they are basically S1 and S2 objects have their own copy of this counter variable.
Yes. Okay. Correct. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So this is the instance variable, and it will get memory will be allocated for this instance variable when you are creating the object of this class. If you are not creating object of this class, the memory will not be allocated for this member. But for the static member, memory is already allocated when this class gets loaded, and that memory allocation is shared among all the instances. If you are not creating instances, no problem, your code will work fine. But if you are creating instances, this counter will be shared. Clear the difference between this instance and static members? Any doubt, anyone? Okay. So now we will do one more program. Okay. Just to identify when to use the member as when to define the member as instance and when to define the member as static. Okay. So for that, here I am using one name of the class. I am using a static method with student class. And this I am creating main method. So now in this class, we will create one student class. Okay. In the same Java file, I am creating one student class. This student class will have some properties. For example, integer roll number, string name, okay, and integer marks. They all are going to, they are sharing one value, or the institute, they are the students of one institute. So I am creating string institute name as the variable where I am going to define the value as, suppose, stu value. Okay. Now, if I create this variable institute name as instance member, there is no point because the value will be same for all. So instead of creating this member as instance variable, I will make this as static. ठीक है. क्यों स्टैटिक बनाया? क्योंकि ये वैल्यू सबके लिए सेम रहेगी. मैं वैल्यू चेंज, ये सारे स्टूडेंट्स जो है वो एक ही इंस्टीट्यूट में है, they are not going to change the value, they will be giving the same value. I am expecting the same value. That's why I am making that variable as static variable, so that अगर इंस्टेंस वेरिएबल मैंने बनाया तो हर एक इंस्टेंस के लिए मेमोरी अलोकेशन विल बी डन for differently for this same institute name value. तो memory waste हो जाएगी. Instead of that, we will create this member as static member. ठीक है. Now I will create one default constructor. Here I am specifying some details. Value, default value, roll number equal to 101. This dot name is equals to some name, and this dot marks नॉट कंपल्सरी कि आपको सब कुछ देना है, आपको स्किप करना है तो कर सकते हो, ठीक है। So for the default constructor, I have mentioned all these values. For this institute name, we have already mentioned the value. There is no need of mentioning it again or defining it again. ठीक है. Now, in this student class, I want to define one method where I want to get these information of student. Suppose that method is public void get student info. Okay. Here I want all the student information. So here I am writing statements. Okay, so we are accessing here instance members. Okay, so whenever you are accessing any instance members, you need to create that method as instance method. Why? Because values will be different according to the instance values, right? So here, suppose this I'm creating the student object. Student S1 is equals to new student. Okay. And I am calling this S1 dot get student info method. The values will be given as per the default, right? Again, if I am creating one more object, student dot student S2 is equals to new student, okay? And I am changing the values from using S2 dot roll number is equals to 63, S2 dot name is equals to kid, S2 dot marks is equals to 65. Okay, so values for this S2 object will be different. So whenever you're calling S2 dot get student info, you will get different values, right? For S1 object, values will be different. For S2 object, values will be different. So whenever you are using instance members, okay, so whenever you are using instance members, you need to create that method as instance method, okay? Now, whenever you are using, or if you want to call the static member, you can create method static, public static void get institute. Okay, get institute name. So here you can system.out.println, you can directly display institute name is equals to access the static member institute name. Okay, so whenever you are using or whenever you want to call or use the static member, make that method as a static method. ठीक है, जैसे पिछले एग्जांपल में भी हमने देखा, there is no point of creating that method as instance method. सेम वही पार्ट यहाँ पे भी है. अगर मेंबर आपका स्टैटिक है, स्टैटिक वेरिएबल को एक्सेस करना है, तो मेथड आपका स्टैटिक ही होना चाहिए. अगर आपके मेंबर्स इंस्टेंस मेंबर्स है, इंस्टेंस में वेरिएबल्स है, तो आप यहाँ पे इसको इंस्टेंस मेथड क्रिएट कर सकते हो. अभी इस इंस्टीट्यूट नेम को कॉल करना है तो आपको ऑब्जेक्ट की जरूरत नहीं है, यू कैन डायरेक्टली कॉल इट विद द हेल्प ऑफ स्टूडेंट क्लास नेम. Clear? So you can access it directly and it is shared among all the instances. Regardless of the instances, the value for the institute name will be same. Up till here, anyone has any doubt? किसी को कुछ डाउट्स है? Okay, so we will continue with the same example tomorrow in the tomorrow session. We will end our session for today here. Okay, everyone. अगर कोई डाउट है इसमें तो आप पूछ लो, एंड इसी सेम एग्जाम्पल के साथ नेक्स्ट पॉइंट्स के साथ हम कल स्टार्ट करेंगे. थैंक यू एवरीवन. इफ यू मे लीव.
Thank you, ma'am.
थैंक यू. सर यू मे एंड द मीटिंग.
Ma'am, can we wind up the session?
यस सर.
Okay, thank you so much.